Hello, welcome to the Community Church of Chapel Hill, Unitarian Universalist. My name is Linda Thompson. I'm a member of the Worship Associates Ministry at the church. Our minister is Reverend Tom Belote. This morning we extend an extra special hello to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Greensboro, who've been invited to join us for worship. Welcome to our UU friends from the Triad. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived at this virtual worship service, you are welcome here. And now I would like to invite you to join our music leaders in singing our first hymn, number 226, People Look East.
People look east, the time is near
of the crowning of the year. Make your house fair as you are able. Trim the hearth and set the table. People look east, of the guest is on the way. Furrows be glad, the earth is bare. One more seed is planted there. Give up your strength, the seed to nourish, that in course and flowering flourish. People look east, love the rose is on the way. Stars keep a watch when night is dim. One more light the bowl shall brim, shining beyond the frosty weather, bright as sun and moon together. People look east, love the star is on the way.
Before our call to worship, let me just take a moment to say a great big thanks to Becky Wabel and Susie Hafer for decorating this corner of the sanctuary for the holidays. As light grows less, as we move into the darkest time of the year, we light candles. We hang strings of light, reminding us that there is light even in the midst of darkness. As days grow colder, and as many of our familiar comforts seem far away, we come into this time of worship, reaching out across the distances that separate us in search of comfort and love. As the calendar turns toward December, we move into this season of anticipation, preparation, hopeful waiting. Come, let us welcome the guests of this hour, faith and hope and love. May our hearts prepare them room. Come, let us worship together. Our chalice-lighting words this morning come from Benedictine monastic Macrina Wiederkehr. I found these words within a series of liturgical readings for Advent that were assembled and created by Erica Hewitt. Hear these words as we light our chalice. I was just thinking one morning during prayer how much alike hope and baking powder are, quietly getting what is best in me to rise, awakening the hint of eternity within. On each of the 4 Sundays of Advent, we light candles, lighting our progress toward the coming of Christmas. And on the first Sunday of Advent, we light the first candle on our Advent wreath for hope. In the words of Rebecca Solnit, hope locates itself in the premise that we don't know what will happen, and that in the spaciousness of that uncertainty is the room to act.
The reading comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is a householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into the vineyard. And he went out about the third hour, and saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. Again he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here all the day idle? They say unto him, Because no man hath hired us. He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. So when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard saith unto his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received a penny. And when they had received it, they murmured against the good man of the house, saying, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good? So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen.
My favorite parable, a sermon for November 29th, 2020. I just can't believe the Bible, my friend told me. I just can't believe the Bible. It's so unrealistic. It's fantasy. My friend, when he said these words to me, wasn't talking about Moses parting the Red Sea. He wasn't talking about Jonah being swallowed by the whale. My friend wasn't talking about Jesus healing the sick or turning water into wine. My friend wasn't even talking about the virgin birth or the resurrection of the dead. So what had led my friend to reject the Bible as unbelievable fantasy? It wasn't any of the miracles. No, it was, get this, the economic commandments found in the book of Deuteronomy. For example, the book of Deuteronomy commands that every 7 years there shall be an erasing of all indebtedness, an erasing of debts. And the book of Deuteronomy commands that every 50 years, the year following 7 cycles of 7 years, there shall be a jubilee year during which all property is redistributed across society. The book of Deuteronomy makes today's democratic socialists look downright conservative, timid, and restrained by comparison. And to my friend, this was utterly unbelievable, offensive to the way things are. The world just doesn't work that way. Let me back up. My sermon this morning is not going to be a deep dive into the economic policies set forth in the Pentateuch. That's a sermon for another time, perhaps. But let me observe, for now, that the Bible contains lots of things that would seem to challenge our belief about fundamental reality. And only some of those things have to do with the existence of God. Today, this Sunday, in the Christian liturgical tradition, it's the first Sunday of Advent. We mark this season in our church by lighting candles on our Advent wreath, by decorating our sanctuary with greens and ribbons and other festive signs of the season. We mark this season as a community with December traditions, and while we're not able to hold the greening and chili supper this year, I am happy to report that our beloved music director, Glenn Merbach, is in the process of creating both a virtual holiday pageant and a virtual choir service. Blows my mind. I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't have some grief for all the ways this season will need to be different this year. Another part of this season is that in worship, I'll often turn to the scriptures, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and consider the meaning and the message of Jesus as we sing about and tell stories of his birth. Advent is often thought of as a time of watchful waiting, preparation, expectation. And this is true, but it's also a time of waiting for our expectations to be disrupted, of preparing to be surprised. As I thought about this, the disruption and the surprise, my mind turned to the parables of Jesus. Parables are stories meant to convey deep and important religious and moral truth through the upsetting of expectations and the subverting of the status quo. And that's how I decided to speak this morning about my favorite parable. How many of you were familiar with the parable of the workers in the vineyard, which Linda shared with us earlier? There is an owner of a vineyard who hires workers to help with the harvest. As the sun is about to rise, he goes out and hires workers, promising them a day's wage. At mid-morning, he goes out again and hires additional workers. At noon and at mid-afternoon, he goes out again and hires still more workers. And finally, late in the afternoon, an hour before the end of the workday, he hires a few additional workers to come work for that last hour. And at the end of the day, he arrives to pay the workers. He pays the workers who toiled in the heat all through the day, pays them the amount he promised them, but also pays the same amount, the very same amount, to all of the others, whether they had worked the full 12 hours, or 9 hours, or 6 hours, or 3 hours, or just that one last hour. When the workers who had worked the full day saw this, they complained that the others were given the same amount as them. But the owner of the vineyard dismissed them, saying, "I kept my word to you. It's not your business how I choose to be generous." What's your reaction to this parable? Be honest. Most people I've found have a negative reaction to this parable. It strikes them as unfair, arbitrary, even capricious. And more than that, they find the explanation of the vineyard owner unsatisfying. They want more justification. The whole situation seems unjust. As one New Testament scholar observes, maybe no other words attributed to Jesus cause as much offense to ethical calculations. Is that how you felt hearing this parable? So what's going on here? How should we make sense of this? There are some who've approached this parable in a way intended to kind of avoid all of the discomfort. They say, oh, this parable is not really about vineyards and laborers at all. It's purely spiritual, completely metaphorical. The story is about getting saved by Jesus. It's about getting into heaven. Parable's about salvation. Maybe it's saying that everybody who's saved will be equal in heaven. Maybe the parable is really an inclusive message about God's love. This interpretation is convenient in that it allows us to sidestep all the questions of fairness that arise. This interpretation is too convenient, allowing us to avoid the discomfort we feel. And this interpretation is also inconsistent with Jesus' central message that the kingdom of heaven is not found in some future world. Salvation is not a matter of earning transportation to some other place. Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven is right here and right now, if only we could make it so. Jesus was not a teacher of a spirituality that is indifferent to or unconcerned with justice in the here and now. Rather, his message is that salvation occurs through creating justice in the here and now. There are others who look at this parable as completely non-spiritual and get stuck on the business practices of the landowner. They hear the story and then they begin to worry about how he'll be able to hire workers in the future once word gets out that this is what he's done. I don't think the parable is asking us to critique the business model of the vineyard owner. So what's going on here? The beauty of parables is that they're not designed to give us one succinct, pithy lesson as a takeaway. Parables are not fables that can be summed up in one line. The moral of this story is. No, rather, parables are invitations to reflection. One of the best ways that I've found to begin to approach a parable is to spend some time within each of the characters. When you first hear a parable, there's often one figure you tend to identify with most. Was there a figure in the parable of the workers in the vineyard who you related to? For me, to be honest, I found myself relating most easily to that worker who arrives at 6 o'clock and works the full day, which is to say, I often see myself as the one who does what I'm supposed to do, which is to say, it's easy for me to have a sense of my own righteousness. But a good exercise for beginning to get inside a parable is to put yourself inside each of the different characters, especially the characters who make the least sense to you. You might say, when in my life have I been like that worker who started in the early morning? When in my life have I been like the one hired last? And when have I been the vineyard owner? And even if you can't relate exactly to all of the characters from your own personal experience, you can still imagine yourself as that character. You can get curious. You can imagine what it might be like to walk a mile in that person's sandals. So what's going on in this parable? And what does it mean to say the kingdom of heaven is like this? As I researched this parable, I found an interpretation offered by a New Testament professor named Matthew Skinner. He offered a way of interpreting the parable that was helpful to me in making sense of it. He asked the question, so who do we believe the workers hired last are? Who do we believe them to be? He said, if we think of the person who worked only the last hour as lazy, as a slacker, as a person with poor work ethic, we're probably projecting our own assumptions and judgments onto the story. He said, what if we imagined a pool of workers hoping to earn their daily bread? Who would be hired first? It would be the strongest, the healthiest, the most able. And who would be the last workers hired? It would be the weak, the sick, the disabled. What if we turned it and saw this parable not as a parable of deserving and undeserving, but as a parable of a society in which all are included? Through that lens, the parable can then be seen as a story of lavish generosity, bounteous graciousness, expansive inclusion. The kingdom of heaven is like this. But in order for it to be that, as we hear it, we need to let go of something. Once more, hear that New Testament professor's interpretation of this parable. In the end, he writes, it's not a story of unfair payments. At the parable's conclusion, the full-day workers don't moan that they've been cheated. They complain instead to the landowner, you have made them equal to us. The landowner's undue kindness thus denies the full-day laborers the bonus they think that they can claim, a sense of their own privilege, superiority. In the end, maybe what draws me to this parable is this sense that its message is about expanding our own hearts, even beyond what is fair or logical or reasonable. May we approach this season turning in our own lives ever in the direction of grace, of generosity, of expansive inclusion so that the last shall be first. May we make space in our own hearts for the unbelievable, the mysterious, and the surprising. May we remain ever open to greater possibility. And may our calculations always leave extra space for larger truth, for greater love. Amen. Each week, we hold in our service a time for sharing the joys and the sorrows of our church community. This week, we have a few joys and sorrows. The first one is a stone that's placed by Wendy Morgan. Wendy shares, "We would like to place a stone of joy. Ben Kubica got into his first choice college, the Rochester Institute of Technology, and was awarded their highest merit scholarship. He will be attending the medical illustration program there.
Congratulations. Ruth Gibson of the Immigrant Justice Initiative asked me to place a stone of delight as we welcome Rosa Ortez Cruz to join the Vallecillos family in the manse. Many of you are aware that Rosa spent 3 years in the sanctuary at the Church of the Reconciliation. She has won her asylum case, but her work permits have been delayed, and so she needed to have a place to live for just a little while until she can legally work. The community of Rosa's friends and supporters look forward to a celebration of her freedom at some future time when we can all be together in person. Stone is placed for Jody Savage. I want to place a stone of caring for Jody, whose mother, Leslie, died on Thursday of this week at the age of 94. Jody's mom had been in hospice in San Diego, and Jody was grateful to be able to speak with her by phone a few hours before her passing. We extend our deepest sympathies to Jody during this time of loss. And finally, a stone is placed this morning for all those joys and sorrows we hold in our hearts which were not spoken. I invite you to join with me this time of prayer. These words by UU Minister Ralph Helverson. As we mingle these prayers with our own, as we hold in our hearts all the joys and the sorrows of this community, as we rejoice with those marking milestones, as we hold in compassion and care each person facing grief, uncertainty, or loss. Let us pray together. O God, keep us from missing life by small neglects that blind the eyes of the Spirit. Keep us from being overly analytical when we need to be understanding, from talking too much when the situation demands listening, from being too orderly when we may need the disorder of insight, from being so evolved in the immediate that we miss the long view of the soul, from making such great efforts in life when the truth that saves us is often so simple, from plodding along when we might hear celestial music and begin a magnificent journey to the kingdom of heaven which lies close at hand. Keep us trusting. Keep us lighting candles in the darkness, knowing that with the eyes of the Spirit and the ears of the mind, we might be free and together. Amen. And blessed be.
High the farmer's wintry hoard, high the golden cord, changefully proclaim. We count the snow hills and plain beneath the sun of May, and frightened from our sprouting grain, the robber crows away. All through the long bright days of June, its leaves grew green and fair, and waved in harmless summer's bloom, with soft and yellow hair. And now with autumn's moonlit eyes, its harvest time has come. We pluck away the frosted leaves and bear the treasure home.
Please join with me in the words by which we extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Now please join in singing Shalom.
Shalom, my friends, shalom,